How to mediate between Iran and the United States when one side wants revenge for the killing of its leader and the other's erratic messaging seems, well, ratings driven. Donald Trump's unilateral ceasefire declaration bringing neither side back to the bargaining table, what with more ships seized in the Strait of Hormuz and lockdown mode relaxed in Pakistan's capital. This for talks that may or may not resume. We'll ask about U.S. demands that can change course inside of the same presidential tweet and an unclear chain of command on both sides. Why was the U.S. president's vice president flanked by Trump confidants Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff last time? Does it actually matter that none of the three are trained diplomats or Iran specialists? And who's really calling the shots in an Islamic republic that's currently in survival mode? On that score, what are Tehran's intentions regarding Hezbollah, its proxy militant group in Lebanon, absent as the U.S. State Department in Washington brokers more old-school style negotiations that are taking place this Thursday between Israelis and Lebanese? Who's got leverage over whom? And if diplomacy fails, what does escalation look like? Today in the France 24 debate, what happens when you have a truce without talks? And joining us for this discussion from Islamabad, he was Pakistan's ambassador to the United States in Donald Trump's first incarnation as U.S. president, retired diplomat and foreign ministry spokesperson, Aizaz Ahmad Chowdhury. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me to the program.
From Aubenas in southern France, he's former French ambassador to Lebanon and several Gulf states, retired diplomat Patrice Paoli. Good to see you.
Bonsoir, François. Thank you for the invitation.
Payman Azmoudeh is an analyst at risk consultants Forward Global. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
We sometimes see him in Istanbul. Journalist Borsu Dargay, whose Badlands newsletter is a go-to source on this war and is here in the flesh in Paris. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Reminder, you can always listen, that's right, listen to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. Get on with it. That's the message to the belligerent parties from shopkeepers and taxi drivers in Islamabad. They looked at the barbed wire around the eventual venue for the talks, the Serena Hotel, and more generally, all the roadblocks in the Pakistani capital's red zone.
The war is between America, Israel, and Iran. Pakistan has closed all the roads here. People are cursing. They feel humiliated. We are making an appeal. We are requesting that they come and negotiate here. This matter will end the war and the problems will end. Look, all the shops have been closed. People are sitting idle. There's inflation and poverty. This is our request that they should come and negotiate. Pakistan should have mercy on the people.
Aizaz Ahmad Chowdhury, how long for that lockdown in the red zone?
Well, this is a relatively small part of Islamabad that is under lockdown, but nevertheless, I think people want these negotiations to start quickly because they want to get on with their life. At the end of the day, however, it is a very small price to pay for the peace that we want to see between the United States and Iran. I think not only Pakistan, but I think the world over, people are waiting for these talks to resume. And as we understand, there are not much differences between them. So it is only a matter of agreeing how to really kickstart the talks. My own sense is that Iranians were upset that when they lifted blockade from the Strait of Hormuz, United States did not lift its blockade from the Arabian Sea. I think that's what has sort of put them off. So that's the key issue now. Maybe perhaps simultaneously, if both sides can lift blockade and then resume their talks, because on most of the other issues, I think they already have an agreement. So we are actually sitting fingers crossed, and let's hope it happens tomorrow, day after. The people of Pakistan are really very keen that this happens sooner than later.
Yeah, Wednesday saw the seizing of 2 container ships by Iran and the firing on 3 vessels inside of the Gulf. Now, the Pentagon putting out images of what it calls a right of visit boarding of the sanctioned tanker Majestic X transporting oil from Iran. This happened in the Indian Ocean. So, as the ambassador was saying, Borzu Daragahi, there's tension over that choke point, which is the Strait of Hormuz, and that's what's preventing the talks from happening?
No, that's not what's preventing the talks from happening. The problem with the talks is that you have a party in the talks, President Donald Trump, who's solely concerned about optics, doesn't really care about the substance of the issues and so on. And he's an impediment to the whole process at this point. They had a deal. They were going to have talks. And then he tweeted something out. And this has been a pattern throughout this. He can't take, the bottom line is this. The U.S. lost the war. They lost. They gambled and they lost. They lost the war. Iran proved itself able to checkmate the United States. It doesn't mean that the Iran won the war, but the U.S. failed in basically all of its goals. But you have this, I'm so sorry, but I've been saying this on the show for a while. You have this narcissistic, completely inappropriate person as president of the United States, I say that as an American, who is in charge of the country, is not able to take the L, not able to take the loss, and step away from this whole situation in a way that would give even the United States or Iran honor. And you also have a kind of non-traditional diplomatic style. The Iranians are just old school diplomats. They want to sit and talk and go through all these issues. And then you have two basically, I'm sorry, Israeli operatives in Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, basically advising this guy, J.D. Vance, who basically doesn't care about this issue, never wanted this war, just wants to try his luck at being president in 2028, trying to game the system for his own advantage. That's not a negotiating team. That's a recipe for dysfunction.
All right, we'll parse it into two parts. You talk about the diplomacy side of it. We'll get to that with all of our panel. But there's the question, Payman Esmudi, do you agree with Borzu Daragahi that the United States has lost the war? After all, we don't know which side can hold out the longest in this game of chicken over oil.
I think it's helpful to go back and revisit what the original objectives were. So this conflict, basically this current phase of the conflict, started in January when Donald Trump was basically encouraging Iranian protesters to go out into the streets, telling them help is on the way, and if the Iranian government starts shooting, I will come help you. That did not happen. What did happen, and that this is based on the reporting that we've gotten since then, is that those protests, the crackdown, sent the message to Trump and to Netanyahu that there's blood in the water, that they're weak, that this is the opportunity to basically take them out, redo the operation against Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, launch these decapitation strikes, and basically bring home another trophy in the span of 3 days. That did not happen. So to the extent that that was the original objective of the war, that's very clearly a failure. We can see this 6 weeks later, the regime is still there. In terms of the nuclear file, there hasn't been any kind of concrete progress either. We don't even know to what extent the White House still cares about it, because Donald Trump says one day we need all the nuclear dust, as he puts it, and the next day it doesn't even figure in the list of demands that's being put forward by a Marco Rubio or Caroline Leavitt. So it's very hard to assess whether it's a victory or failure when, and I think you're right here, one of the parties can't even get its story straight about what it is they're trying to accomplish. So on that point, it's definitely not a victory. Declaring it a defeat, we'll have to see kind of what actually the deal that ultimately does shake out looks like.
Because it'll be a deal. You're saying there's going to be a deal.
Conflicts end. All conflicts end. So whether we get, a JCPOA style, really concrete, detailed document, no, because I don't think you're right here. The team in the White House is not set up to produce that kind of deal. Is not set up to undertake that kind of really detailed, exhaustive, months-long, years-long negotiation. What you might end up with, and I think is more likely, is something like what happened with Kim Jong-un in North Korea during Donald Trump's first term. There are talks, there's optics, there are photo ops. So J.D. Vance went to Islamabad and shook hands with Ghalibaf a couple weeks ago.
Speaker of Parliament.
Donald Trump went to North Korea and crossed the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, back in 2019. But nothing actually concretely came out of that. North Korea basically came out of that show of negotiation stronger. And it's looking like, based on all the theater that we're seeing, and I mean, it's a very tense situation. Obviously, people are very concerned for the global economy. But it seems like the boarding of the ships, the blockade of the blockade, it seems like, and I agree with the former ambassador here, they did basically reach some kind of agreement, it sounds like, and President Trump has basically decided to get into the gamesmanship of it. But my personal feeling is that we're going to have kind of this muddled exit that doesn't actually resolve the situation in the region. So the global economy is going to be dealing with this for months, for years probably. But at some point, Trump will say, I won, game over, and I'm going to go deal with the next thing.
So, Patrice Paoli, you know a thing or two about exhaustive diplomacy, because you were one of those French diplomats in on the ground floor of what became the UN Iran deal, the so-called JCPOA. Do you agree that there is no good ending with what Borzu said earlier in view of what the diplomacy looks like?
Well, I agree mainly on one point, is that, well, from day one, this war is a disaster. This initiative to launch a war as a negotiation was going on in Geneva. To negotiate, you have to have a goal. I don't know what the goals of the American administration are. As the previous speakers in this debate said, it's not clear. I mean, from one day to another, you change objectives. President Trump makes very contradictory statements. So you don't know exactly what you're headed for. So first of all, you don't have clear goals. Second, you don't have a team which is trained for negotiations, and I don't even know if the leaders know what the negotiation means. It means time, especially if you negotiate with Iran, as was said previously, in a more traditional way. The agreement in 2015 took months of negotiations and hundreds of pages of documents. I don't see any inclination in the Trump administration for what we call negotiations in the first place, which takes time. You have to build a process, build some kind of confidence, and I don't see any of this happening now. Plus, you negotiate with.
What about Payman's point? Take a few pictures like Trump did when he went to North Korea, and then move on to something else.
Maybe. I don't think that President Trump is very patient, and the negotiation means patience, and he has not shown this kind of patience anywhere, or this kind of consistency and persistence in the negotiation. So if you don't have clear objectives, you don't have the patience or the persistence for negotiations, and you just negotiate through tweets. Plus, you only negotiate in terms of presenting ultimatums every day, as the Israelis do with Lebanon or with any of their partners. So I don't see the ingredients for a proper negotiation in place right now. Unfortunately, even though negotiations are always better, my DNA as a diplomat is, of course, in favor of negotiations, but I don't see that the ingredients are there to provide for a good negotiation.
Pakistan's government this Thursday putting out images of the Interior Minister, Mohsin Naqvi, once again meeting with the U.S. Chargé d'Affaires. She's a career diplomat. Her name is Natalie Baker. Those images, Aizaz Ahmed Chowdhury, are they also an illustration of the problem? After all, this is the Chargé d'Affaires. There's no U.S. ambassador right now to Pakistan. What do you think of U.S.-style diplomacy under Donald Trump?
U.S. presidency under Donald Trump is very different from all the previous presidencies that we've had. But I would say that President Trump knows that he needs this deal. He needs this deal perhaps more than the Iranians need that deal, because the kind of political cost that he's paying for continuation of the war I think his party is now very clear that they need to put a closure to it. If this continues any longer, already the impression in the United States is that you would be, it is not United States war. It is Israel's war that the US is fighting. Look at people like Bernie Sanders, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris. I mean, everybody is saying the same thing. For the first time in the US, we are hearing these voices that America is fighting Israel's war. So that means that the Republican Party would like to put a closure to it. Now, on the Iran side also, I think they have lost a full run of the leadership. They have lost so much, in terms of life and property. They would also like to have a deal. So it is my sense that they just need to ride over this blockade business, because nobody wants to negotiate under pressure. If Iran lifts the blockade, the US must also lift the blockade. Perhaps they can do simultaneously. So Pakistanis are trying to, I think, send out this message that, look, don't throw a baby with the bathwater. You're almost there. And as for the details people were talking about, I think if there is an agreement in principle, they will leave it to the diplomats to put all the details in it. But the agreement in principle is very important, and we hope that it happens soon, because the world economy is going to have such a hard time if this continues any longer. And if the war resumes, I'm afraid the world economy could head towards a recession, which none of us can afford. So I do hope sincerely that both sides will, Senate will prevail and both sides will come back to the table. Pakistan is very much ready to host them anytime they are ready, but sooner it is, better it would be.
All right, so Islamabad leaving the light on. Payman Nazmuddin, though, who blinks first? Again, it's this question of, we could talk later about what escalation would look like, but first, right now, the fact that there is no oil going out. We had last night on this in this studio, energy analysts saying we're now at the point where in those Gulf states, and they include Iran, you're going to have to shut oil wells because you can't get that oil out anymore.
And that causes permanent damage. So when you shut down oil facilities, when they stop running for a couple of weeks, you have basically crude that filters back in. It takes months to get those back online. So especially in the Iranian case, you're dealing with mature oil fields. So they end up taking...
Can Iran take the pain?
They want to send the message that they can. But I think this is an important point. When we're talking about, and I think you make some very good and very, very poignant points, we talk about the U.S. side, and we talk about the issues on the U.S. side, and we talk about how dysfunctional the U.S. side is and how the U.S. government is. Let's take all of that, say we accept it.
That's been chronicled.
That's been chronicled. Let's look at the Iranian side. So there is a fascinating article that came out in the New York Times today showing basically what the Iranian government wants to signal about how things are working internally. So you had several sources from within the regime basically giving the New York Times this really detailed kind of picture of, okay, this is the kind of condition that Mojtaba Khamenei is in. They almost made him sound like Darth Vader. Like he's waiting for prosthetics, his face is burned.
Yeah, let's go over this, because the Times speaking to, they said 6 senior Iranian officials, including at least one who went on the record, who's quoted by name in the article. They paint the picture of a new supreme leader who's injured but alive. Mojtaba Khamenei. Mojtaba, thank you for the correction, who gets his messages in physically delivered notes. He's kept away from Revolutionary Guards commanders who might give away his location. The piece also describes how last week's U.S. blockade of the U.S. Strait of Hormuz triggered an argument between the hardliners, like the head of the Revolutionary Guard, Ahmed Vahidi, and pragmatists who include President Pezeshkian, the Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, the Commander-in-Chief, General Vahidi, and several other generals argued that talks were futile because, and this is a quote, the blockade showed Mr. Trump was not interested in negotiations and wanted to pressure Iran to surrender. This is according to 2 officials and 2 members of the guards who were briefed on the meeting. The generals won and the talks fell apart.
So the message, and I think this is the most important message that the regime was basically trying to send through those sources who were talking to the New York Times, is that there isn't actually, the way Trump is saying, daylight between the generals. So we're talking about Ahmed Vahidi, so the new commander-in-chief of the IRGC. We're talking about Mohammad Ghalibaf, the president of the parliament. These folks are part of the same circle. So these two, Mojtaba Khamenei, Hossein Taeb, who was the former head of IRGC intelligence, they're basically, this is the clique running the country, and they've all been friends. And this is the message that they were trying to send. We've all been friends for 40 years. We have lunch together every week. We're all on the same page. There's no daylight. And I think the irony of the situation is that in the immediate term, the wartime footing, this context of immediate pressure being put on the U.S., does help them stay unified in the immediate term. At the same time, you can see that this regime is still deeply concerned about its own stability and its own ability to stay in power. So you have executions happening daily of political prisoners, people who are accused of spying for Israel, people who are accused of being members of the MEK, so one of the opposition groups. You have these nightly demonstrations where you have pro-regime militiamen basically parading with weapons, basically saying, we're ready to fight. Here's the thing. When you have someone on camera with an AK-47 saying, we're ready to fight off the U.S. with this handgun, they're not shooting down an F-35 or an A-10 with a handgun. They're not hitting Israel with a handgun. That message is to the rest of the population. That message is to the people who were protesting in January is, we consider you to be the enemy.
Yeah.
And we, 10 million, 12 million, however many it is that we can consider to be the true believers, we're ready to fight basically until the last.
Just to be clear, Payman, you're saying that the regime, 6 different people inside the regime may have fed a story to the New York Times?
Of course. And it's not the first time. I mean, their media strategy, I mean, they've had years to do this. They when you see, for example, anonymous regime sources talking to the New York Times or Reuters, I mean, Borza knows this better than I do, they coordinate. I mean, they get messages across this way. So this is one way of doing it. The Lego videos that they've been putting out is another way of doing it. But they're actually quite astute when it comes to playing Western perceptions and Western media. And I think when we see, 10 sources from inside the system talking to an outlet like the New York Times for an article, there are messages they are trying to get across.
All right. In Tehran's Vanak Square this Thursday, a banner depicting a fist grasping the Strait of Hormuz, bearing slogans such as Trump could not do anything, and the permanent control of the Strait of Hormuz will be with Iran. These kinds of public displays, Borzo Dargai, they sign of strength or weakness?
I think that they're a sign of weakness to some extent. That countries like that parade missiles around in squares, they're not confident countries. Countries that are always obsessed with waving their flag, whether that's the Iranian flag or the American flag or the Israeli flag. These are insecure countries that are not confident about their national identity, unlike, for example, France or Germany. So yeah, I think these are signs of weakness. I will say that the message, to add on to what Payman was saying, the message right now that is coming from Iran is that they want to destroy the Trump administration. I think that is one of their major goals. That is why I think that they will have
messaging, or that's their actual goal?
That's messaging, and that's actually their goal as well. I think that if you listen to if you parse their comments, if you parse their strategy, they're basically ready to just destroy. They want to destroy the Trump administration. They are, as everyone can see now, they are super attuned, not just to American culture, American political culture, and the American political calendar. They want to destroy the Trump administration. They want to destroy him once and for all. They want to they want to destroy MAGA. They're seeing that they're having an impact. If you look at the Lego videos, they're aimed at dividing Americans along the right, especially kind of focused on your your government is run by pedophiles. They ordered you to die for Israel. That's their messaging. And they're basically trying to splinter the U.S. right and to splinter the MAGA coalition in an effort to destroy Trump. And that's what they're going to do. And that's why I think that they have more patience. They have more strategic patience, at least until September. If you look at the oil issue is very important. They have reservoirs. They have reservoirs for maybe and storage for maybe 3 more weeks. Then they'll have to shut things down. But they have been stockpiling goods and machinery and parts for both the consumer market and for their military since June of last year, when you had the June strikes. They knew this was coming, and they've been waiting for this. So I think that at the very least, they'll be able to hold out until September. That will be deadly for Donald Trump if gas prices keep edging up, if the summer comes. And that's what they want. And they basically, they basically want to give the message that if you ever do this again, we will destroy yet another U.S. president. Iran has already destroyed one Democrat. Now they're going to destroy.
You're talking about Jimmy Carter?
Jimmy Carter.
In 1990.
And that was strategic, and they waited out. If you remember, Iran in 1979, 1980, they waited until the day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated before they released the hostages from the U.S. embassy. The very day. And that's basically, and that was back then when the country was run by a bunch of radical activists and students and crazy clerics and militiamen. Imagine now, 1981. Yeah, imagine now the level of sophistication that has developed, and they're basically timing whatever they do to the American political calendar and the American political scene and the price of gas at the pump in Texas and California.
All right, and we're seeing reports, by the way, of air defense batteries activated in Tehran. The cause unclear. That's according to Iran's Noor news agency. Patrice Paoli, in the village, in the town of Aubenas in the beautiful Ardèche region of France. If time is on Iran's side, of course, the locals won't be pleased when they go to the pump. How do you get back to the negotiating table if Iran now wants to play a waiting game?
Well, first of all, yes, people are suffering. I mean, the war that was waged by the United States and Israel has very tough consequences for the population. And it is now a very strong element in the public debate in France, as it is in many countries, on how to help out people who are very much depending on gas for their work, for their transportation, etc. Going back to I mean, I heard a lot about who's winning and who's not winning. I think nobody wins for the time being, and this war is not leading to any clear victory for anyone. But if the Iranian regime can stay in place, then it wins. I mean, every day that passes without losing is, in a way, a victory. Now, I wish that Ambassador Chaudhry is right and that negotiations can proceed and advance. But I don't know if you read the statement made by Israel Katz, the Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was saying that he was waiting for a signal from the Trump administration to bring back Iran to the Stone Age. So I think that there are other partners in the equation, other elements, and I think that some of them might not be content with any type of agreement that could come out of negotiations. I think it's a long way, and I think that the will to negotiate is maybe not present everywhere.
The Mer news agency saying air defense has heard engaging hostile targets in parts of Tehran in the last minutes. We'll find out more on what that means. We don't have much more to go on that. Yeah, Ambassador Chaudhry, a lot to unpack here. First of all, when it comes to, again, there's this question of the diplomacy. We've seen the Iranian delegation that showed up for the first round with J.D. Vance. It was led by the Speaker of Parliament that Peyman mentioned there, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, and the Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi. Are those the right interlocutors for this discussion? Are you sure that the messages are getting through to whoever is calling the shots?
Well, every country has centers of power. and they all somehow come together when it comes to their very, national interests and their very sovereignty is concerned. So I'm not that worried about the differences between various power centers within Iran. Maybe my other two panelists are better informed. But the way I look at it is that when Mr. Kalibaf came, he also has that background with the IRGC, and he has also, I'm sure, has consulted them. So one should accept at face value when these interlocutors come. The same goes for Vice President Vance when he is accompanied by Jared Kushner or Steve Witkoff, whether they are known for being Israel's friends or not. They are American representatives, and we have to take them at the face value. Yes, I agree with Patrice that the Israelis, naturally Netanyahu is not happy with this agreement, and he started the Lebanon fire because he thought that this agreement doesn't apply on him.
And he's probably on that point, if I might add, Ambassador, on that point, he's probably not happy with Pakistan being the mediator. You're one country that has virtually no relations at all with Israel.
That's true, but at the same time, Pakistan doesn't have a direct conflict with Israel. All we want is that there should be a Palestinian state, a two-state solution, and more than that, I think we are not a party directly in that conflict. So what I was trying to say is that even if the Israelis want to be a spoiler in this, they cannot, because Israel has very limited influence without the United States. And we saw the United States prevail on Israel to stop the fire in Lebanon, which then enabled Iranians to lift the blockade from the Strait of Hormuz. The problem occurred when the Americans did not wish to lift the blockade. And that's where the Iranians felt, whether they were the IRGC people or the foreign minister or presidency or whosoever, that why should we be negotiating under pressure, under stress? So I think that's the problem. That's why I suggested in my very first intervention, the solution is for them to do it simultaneously. Because if we don't do that and we keep blocking each other's ships and running after, laying mines in the strait, it will be terrible. I think we will be going far, far away from that. And we must not. This brinkmanship must stop now. Brinkmanship can sometimes, take you away. And I remember there's a book that President Trump had written, The Art of the Deal. And in that, he remembers, I remember if it was chapter 4 or something, push, push, and push, that he wants to push it to the wire. But then before it goes down, he wants to clinch a deal. I hope he does that, because he needs that deal as much as the Iranians do, as much as the world itself does.
All right, it's important that you mentioned there, Aizaz Ahmad Chowdhury, that it's not just Iran versus the United States. There are talks taking place in Washington between allies. And there's a question of how much they're controlled. Israel on the one hand, proxy Hezbollah on the other. There's currently a 10-day ceasefire, but we've seen that ceasefire violated. 5 killed in the south of Lebanon on Wednesday. Villages bulldozed. A journalist, a Lebanese journalist, among the dead. The question is how much each side wants to rein in their allies / proxies. Borzu Daragahi, first off, Israel and Lebanon right now.
Yeah.
Could this be solved quickly, more quickly perhaps even than U.S. and Iran, if pressure is applied from Tehran, from Washington?
I don't think so. I don't think it'll be solved quickly. I think that Israel has made a decision with regard to Lebanon. If you notice, they don't just target Hezbollah anymore. They're targeting the entire Shia community. They've done things like, for example, give just bone-chilling warnings, like if you are a Maronite or Sunni in southern Lebanon and you are sheltering a Shia, not a Hezbollah member, but a Shia, then you will be targeted legitimately. They're going after Shia communities. They're trying to create a sectarian civil war in the country to keep it busy. They're trying to stoke, and there's a lot of room to move, and there's a lot of maneuverability, and there's a lot of openness right now because of the fragmentation of the Lebanese society and the anger that many people feel towards Hezbollah for the perception that they dragged Lebanon into this war. So there's a real danger and a real goal on the part of Israel at this point, not to resolve this issue, but to provoke a sectarian civil war in Lebanon.
All right, so Patrice Paoli, we've had 2 French UN peacekeepers killed in southern Lebanon in an ambush attributed to Hezbollah. Who do you blame for their deaths? All right. It seems as though the video link with Aubenas in the south of with France needs to be restored. Payman Asmoudeh, your thoughts on this?
I think fundamentally, to the extent that Israel wants to play a spoiler in these talks, obviously Lebanon is the way to do it. I think you're right that Israel is not concerned about Lebanon's sovereignty. Israel is not concerned about Lebanon's stability. And essentially, and this is the irony of the situation, if you look at where Hezbollah came from in the first place, what basically gave the IRGC the opportunity to create this militant group in the 80s was the Israeli intervention in Lebanon, was the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon. And with this renewed offensive, with this renewed occupation, it's almost as if we've come full circle. So Hezbollah has basically recreated the crisis that gave it its initial legitimacy, its initial reason for being. And on some level, I think that shows just how destructive and self-defeating kind of the axis of resistance strategy has turned out to be for Iran. Basically, you've recreated this crisis. I mean, you had so much money and blood and treasure invested in this brutal civil war in Syria, where Hezbollah was responsible for many of the worst crimes basically committed by the Assad regime. And now you basically have Hezbollah dragging Lebanon back into the war, giving basically this really extremist Israeli government the perfect excuse and the perfect opportunity to do what it wants to do in terms of interfering in its neighbors' affairs. But
if you're Hezbollah, you don't exist if there's peace between Israel and Lebanon, right? So you want to.
Right. The question is basically fundamentally, what kind of Lebanese society do you want to see? And the problem fundamentally with Hezbollah is that Hezbollah is not a uniquely Lebanese phenomenon. Hezbollah is not a uniquely Lebanese party. Hezbollah is a proxy force. It's the same issue in Iraq. You have the Hashd al-Shabi. The Hashd al-Shabi, the Popular Mobilization Forces, are part of the Iraqi government. They're part of the state. They touch state salaries. But they're as loyal to the Islamic Republic of Iran as they are loyal to their own country, if not more so. Fundamentally, if you were to have a sovereign Lebanese state, a functional Lebanese state, you would have a Hezbollah probably with Amal as a civilian political party functioning within Lebanese politics. But that doesn't work for Iran. So I think it's important to remember the crisis in Lebanon today, it's 2 interventions. It's an Israeli intervention and it's an Iranian intervention. And they're both equally destructive fundamentally for people in Lebanon.
All right, before the gremlins cut the link to Aubenas, but we managed to restore it. Ambassador Paoli, who do you blame for the death of those 2 French UN peacekeepers in southern Lebanon?
Well, I have no direct information myself. What I heard from the French authorities is that it appears that Hezbollah bears the responsibility for those the ambush in which the French soldiers were killed or wounded.
But beyond that, do you blame Israel? Do you blame Iran? Do you blame Washington as well?
No, I'm not here to blame anyone. I'm just here to say what we see and try to analyze the situation. You are in a war which is much wider than what we talked about. I mean, if you look at the overall picture, Israel has increased its occupation of Syrian land. Daily, it is increasing its annexation of parts of the West Bank and allowing settlers to carry out terrorist actions every day against Palestinian population. You have a situation in Gaza which is not solved and where the whole area has been almost totally destroyed. You have in Lebanon an area which is now under very strong military pressure, where there is destruction of villages about a band of 6 to 8 kilometers north of the Israeli border inside Lebanon, where everything is being destroyed to create a void, so a buffer zone. So if you link this to expansionist policies and what is called Greater Israel, which is now more and more present in daily statements by the Israeli government, you see that anyhow, whatever the situation is, you have a will to settle problems by occupation, by force. Netanyahu said that he would impose peace by force. I think it doesn't work. It never worked in Lebanon. It didn't work in 78. It didn't work in 82. It didn't work in 2006. So I'm not saying that Hezbollah is the good guy in the equation. They obviously bear a very heavy responsibility in the situation in Lebanon and the destruction that occurred in Lebanon. But you have in front of you a government which is not inclined to negotiation, who wants to solve problems by force, and that's what it has chosen to do with Iran alongside with the Americans. Maybe they convinced the Americans, and today you have a government which is trying to impose, not negotiate. So I'm not very optimistic. I think that we have to support Nawaf Salam and his government, which are people of goodwill that we know very well, who have been working within the UN system and in favor of their country, with Hassan Salameh, the Minister of Culture, and these people are trying their best to have a negotiation.
So they deserve
it is
support.
There's an imbalance.
We're running a little short on time.
They deserve support, but
I want to ask Aizaz Ahmad Chowdhury, because when you talk about others being drawn in to the conflict, Israel trying to draw in Lebanon, Pakistan's closest ally in the region traditionally is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's crown prince last week welcomed the Pakistani Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif. There's very close ties between those two nations. Do you fear that a situation where Iran tries to draw in Saudi Arabia to a wider conflict, and then Saudi Arabia calls for help from Pakistan?
Well, Pakistan does have an agreement of mutual defense with Saudi Arabia. But I believe by the virtue of that agreement, the best service that Pakistan can do is to persuade Iran not to attack Saudi Arabia, and to also persuade Saudi Arabia not to allow American bases there to be used against Iran. And that is exactly what Pakistan has been doing. If Pakistan enters the war, that would absolutely be of no use to anyone. Pakistan's best role is to douse flames of war. And that is what exactly we have been doing, and Saudis are quite appreciative of it. You know, they were here in Pakistan, their foreign minister, together with Turkey foreign minister and Egypt foreign minister, because that's what we all want to do, to stop the war rather than to enter the war.
Aizaz Ahmad Chowdhury, I want to thank you so much for joining us from Islamabad. I want to thank Patrice Paoli for being with us from Aubenas in southern France. Borzou Daragahi, Peymon Azmoudeh, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.